For over 3 billion years, life was a prisoner of the sea. Oceans, lakes, and rivers teemed with a kaleidoscope of creatures, but the land was a silent, empty continent. It was an alien world of rock and strange, primitive plants, baked by an unfiltered sun and lashed by storms. To leave the water was to leave existence itself. Yet, life is relentless. It pushes at boundaries. It seeks new frontiers. In the murky shallows of the Devonian period, a revolutionary idea was taking shape. Within the body of a unique group of fish, a blueprint for a new world was being drawn. They developed crude lungs to gulp the air and fins of bone and muscle, strong enough to push against the muddy bottom. One day, one of these creatures did the unthinkable. It pushed itself from the familiar comfort of the water and took the first desperate breath of air on a hostile shore. This was not just a step, it was a leap across worlds, an act of biological bravery that would forever change the future of our planet. Imagine a world of profound silence, a planet turning through space, its continents vast, empty, and utterly alien. This was Earth, 400 million years ago. The land was a realm of rock and dust, a geological masterpiece untouched by life. Great mountain ranges, worn down by relentless wind and rain, stood like ancient monuments over plains of gravel and sand. There were no forests to soften the landscape, no grasslands to sway in the breeze, no sound of birdsong, no buzz of insects, no rustle of leaves. The only noises were the whisper of the wind across stone and the distant, constant roar of the ocean on a lonely shore. The supercontinent Gondwana dominated the southern hemisphere, a single, immense expanse of barren earth. The atmosphere itself was different, thinner, with less oxygen than we enjoy today. The sun's ultraviolet radiation beat down with a ferocity that would be lethal to most unprotected modern life. The ozone layer, our planet's vital shield, was still developing. Life did exist here, but it was nearly invisible. Thin, dark crusts of cyanobacteria and lichen-like organisms clung to damp rocks, photosynthesizing in a quiet, desperate struggle for existence. They were the true pioneers, performing the slow, thankless work of creating the very first traces of soil, breaking down rock particle by particle over millions of years. But they were a world away from the complex ecosystems we know. For a visitor, this world would be a hostile, almost menacing place. The colors would be muted browns, grays, and reds of raw geology. The air would be thin and strange. The silence would be absolute, a profound emptiness that spoke of a world waiting for its story to begin. This was a stage without actors, a canvas waiting for its first stroke of green. Every river that carved its way through the rock flowed into the great, global ocean. And while the land slept in its primordial stillness, that ocean was anything but silent. It was a world away, a realm of constant motion, of vibrant color, and of ferocious competition. Just beyond the sterile shores, hidden from the harsh sun and the scouring winds, a biological revolution was in full swing, a drama of epic proportions that had been unfolding for 100 million years. The future of the planet was not being written on the stone of the continents, but in the water. We leave the silent land behind and plunge beneath the waves. Here, the silence is broken. The world explodes into life. This is the Silurian Ocean, a warm, shallow, sunlit realm teeming with creatures that defy imagination. For over 100 million years since the Great Cambrian explosion, life had been furiously experimenting, filling every available niche in the marine world. And this world was ruled by invertebrates. The seafloor was a bustling metropolis of trilobites, armored arthropods that scuttled in their thousands, their complex eyes watching a world of perpetual twilight. They were the grazers, the scavengers, the foundation of a complex food web. Above them, elegant crinoids, or sea lilies, waved their feathery arms in the current, filtering microscopic particles from the water. Vast reefs, unlike anything that exists today, stretched for miles. They were not built by coral, but by layered communities of sponges and strange stony organisms called stromatoporoids, creating intricate habitats for countless other species. But this was no peaceful garden. It was an arena of intense competition. The apex predators were terrifying in their design. Giant nautiloids, with their long, conical shells and powerful tentacles, hunted with jet-propelled speed. Yet even they were wary of the true kings of this domain, the eurypterids, the sea scorpions. Some grew to the size of a human, their powerful claws and armored tails making them the undisputed masters of the Silurian seas. They were the ultimate expression of the invertebrate body plan, a dynasty of arthropods at the peak of their power. In this kingdom of shells, claws, and exoskeletons, a new kind of creature was swimming. It was small, often unassuming, and lacked the formidable weaponry of its neighbors. It had no pincers, no complex outer armor, and no tentacles. But it possessed something internal, a radical innovation that would ultimately change the course of life on Earth. Deep within its body was a flexible rod of cartilage, a notochord, the precursor to a true backbone. These were the first vertebrates, the earliest jawless fish. They were the underdogs, the survivors, navigating a world of giants. But in their simple, revolutionary anatomy lay the blueprint for a dynasty that would one day conquer not just the water, but the silent, empty world beyond it. Among the bustling invertebrates of the Silurian seas, the first fish were humble creatures. Lacking jaws, they navigated their world with caution. Species like Cephalaspis were covered in a heavy, bony head shield, a defensive adaptation in a world of powerful sea scorpions. They were bottom dwellers, filtering nutrients from the mud or swimming slowly, their cumbersome armor offering protection at the cost of agility. For millions of years, this was the story of the vertebrate, a story of survival, not dominance. They were prey, hiding in the shadows of the invertebrate rulers. But deep within their genetic code, evolution was working on a masterpiece of biological engineering. The breakthrough came from an unlikely source: the gill arches, the bony structures that supported the gills. Through a series of gradual modifications, the first pair of these arches began to shift forward, to hinge, to become something entirely new. They became jaws. This was not just a minor improvement. It was one of the most significant evolutionary events in the history of life. The jaw transformed vertebrates from passive filter feeders into active, efficient predators. A fish could now bite, grasp, and tear. It could defend itself, hunt larger prey, and compete directly with the arthropod giants. The advent of the jaw triggered an explosion of diversity. The first jawed fish, known as placoderms and acanthodians, appeared on the scene. The acanthodians, or spiny sharks, were sleek and agile, some of the first creatures with streamlined bodies built for speed. The placoderms continued the tradition of armor, but now it was paired with a powerful bite. This innovation set off a co-evolutionary arms race. As fish became better hunters, their prey had to evolve better defenses. In turn, this drove the fish to become even more effective predators. The balance of power in the oceans began a slow but irreversible shift. The long reign of the invertebrates was being challenged from within. The vertebrates were no longer just survivors. They were becoming faster, stronger, and more sophisticated. The oceans were filling with an astonishing variety of fish, each adapting to a different way of life. The jaw was the key that had unlocked the ocean's full potential, and the once humble vertebrate was now armed, dangerous, and destined for greatness. The age of invertebrates was ending. The age of fishes had begun. Welcome to the Devonian period, a world transformed. The oceans, once the exclusive domain of invertebrates, now belonged to the fish. This was their golden age, an era of unprecedented diversity and staggering scale. From the poles to the equator, the seas teemed with vertebrates of every shape and size, locked in a constant struggle for survival and supremacy. Early sharks, with their cartilaginous skeletons and sleek torpedo-like bodies, patrolled the open waters, representing a new model of predatory efficiency. But the undisputed titans of this age were the placoderms, the armored fish. They had diversified into thousands of species, but one stood above all others as the ultimate expression of aquatic power, audacious. This was a creature of incredible proportions, a leviathan reaching lengths of up to 6 meters. Its head and torso were encased in thick, bony plates that acted as a near-impenetrable shield. It moved through the water with the force of a locomotive, its powerful tail propelling its massive body forward. But its most formidable feature was its mouth. Audacious had no teeth. Instead, its jaw was lined with massive sharpened plates of bone. Through constant grinding, these plates were self-sharpening, creating a shear bite with devastating force, one of the most powerful in the history of life. It was the apex predator of the Devonian world, a hyper-carnivore that sat at the very top of the food chain. Its presence shaped the entire ecosystem, driving other species to evolve greater speed, more effective camouflage, or heavier armor. To be a creature of the Devonian Sea was to live in the shadow of this armored king. For millions of years, Audacious and its placoderm relatives reigned supreme. They were a testament to the success of the vertebrate plan, masters of their aquatic universe. With the oceans conquered, it seemed that the story of the fish had reached its climax. But in the grand theater of evolution, the headline act can sometimes distract from a quieter, more profound story unfolding in the wings. In the shadow of these armored giants, another kind of fish swam. It was not the largest, nor the most powerful. But it carried within its body a peculiar secret, a biological curiosity in its fins that was far more revolutionary than any armor plate. It was a blueprint for a future no creature in the Devonian Sea could possibly imagine. Away from the deep, open oceans where the armored placoderms held court, other dramas were playing out in different environments. In the shallow, brackish waters of estuaries and river systems, a different kind of fish was thriving. It did not possess the terrifying bite of Audacious or the sleek speed of the early sharks. Its claim to fame was something far more subtle, hidden within its very anatomy. This was the world of the Sarcopterygii, the lobe-finned fishes. To the casual observer, they looked like any other fish, but their fins were fundamentally different from those of their relatives, the ray-finned fish, which would go on to become the dominant group of fish in the modern world. A ray fin is a delicate web of skin supported by thin, bony spines, perfect for steering and maneuvering in open water. A lobe fin, however, was a fleshy, stalk-like appendage, and inside that fleshy lobe was a startling arrangement of bones, a single, large bone connected to the shoulder, followed by 2 smaller bones, and then a fan of even smaller bones at the end. This pattern was a revelation. It was the basic architectural plan for the limb of every terrestrial vertebrate that would ever live. Every amphibian, every reptile, every dinosaur, every bird, and every mammal, including us. These were not just fins, they were proto-limbs. These fish, like Eusthenopteron, likely used these powerful, paddle-like fins to navigate the complex, cluttered environments they inhabited. In shallow, weedy water, a muscular fin would be far more useful for pushing off the bottom or maneuvering through dense vegetation than a delicate ray fin. Furthermore, many of these lobe-finned fish possessed another crucial adaptation for life in these potentially stagnant, oxygen-poor waters: primitive lungs. They could rise to the surface and gulp air, supplementing the oxygen they absorbed through their gills. These traits were not forward-thinking preparations for a life on land. They were immediate, practical solutions for surviving and thriving in their specific aquatic niche. But evolution is blind, working without foresight. It tinkers and adapts, repurposing existing structures for new functions, unaware of the grand potential of its own creations. In these strange, fleshy fins lay the foundation for a leg. In that gasp of air at the water's surface lay the promise of a breath. The stage was set, the actors were ready, and the shoreline was waiting. Within the murky, shallow waters of the Devonian period, an evolutionary masterpiece was quietly taking shape. It was not a grand, sudden leap, but a subtle modification of an existing design. The key lay inside the fins of a group of fish known as the lobe-fins, creatures like the well-studied eusthenopteron. To the naked eye, their fins appeared fleshy and paddle-like, useful for navigating the cluttered, swampy waterways they called home. But a look inside revealed a secret that would change the course of life on Earth. Unlike the simple, fan-like rays of most fish fins, these contained a robust, internal skeleton. And the pattern of these bones was astonishingly familiar. It began with one large, sturdy bone connected to the shoulder girdle. This was followed by two smaller, parallel bones, which then connected to a cluster of even smaller bones at the fin's extremity. One bone, two bones, many bones. This is the fundamental blueprint for the limb of every four-legged vertebrate that has ever lived, from dinosaurs to birds, from whales to human beings. Our own arms and legs are a direct echo of this ancient Devonian pattern. This remarkable consistency is no accident. It's the work of a deeply conserved set of genetic instructions known as Hox genes. These master control genes lay out the basic body plan of an animal as it develops, determining where the head, tail, and limbs should go. The genes that instructed the fish to build its fin with a one-bone, two-bone structure are the very same genes that build our arms. Evolution, it turns out, is a masterful tinkerer, not a radical inventor. It prefers to modify what already exists. These proto-limbs were not yet ready for walking on land. Their primary function was likely aquatic maneuvering, allowing these fish to push off the substrate, pivot in tight spaces, and prop themselves up in the shallows. They were the perfect tools for a life lived in the complex, three-dimensional world of a prehistoric swamp. But in their very structure, they held a profound potential. They were an accidental pre-adaptation for a world their owners had not yet even conceived of. The architectural plan for legs was complete, encoded in their DNA and expressed in their bones. All that was needed now was a powerful reason to put that plan to a radical new use. The Devonian period may be known as the Age of Fishes, but for many of its inhabitants, it was an age of unprecedented danger. The aquatic ecosystems, from vast oceans to winding freshwater rivers, were locked in a ferocious evolutionary arms race. In the open waters, colossal armored predators like the audacious, a fish with a bite force rivaling that of any creature in history, reigned supreme. The ancestors of modern sharks, sleek and efficient hunters, patrolled the seas. Even in the seemingly safer freshwater environments, danger was everywhere. Giant predatory lobe-finned fish, some several meters long, lurked in the depths, preying on their smaller relatives. For our ancestors, the medium-sized lobe fins with their special bony fins, the water was a perilous place. They were caught in the middle, predators to smaller creatures, but vulnerable prey for the titans of their world. This constant threat created a powerful evolutionary push. Any trait that offered even a momentary escape could mean the difference between life and continuation of a lineage. But there was also a pull. While the waters teemed with danger, the land was a vast, unclaimed territory. For millions of years, plants had been colonizing the continents, creating the first forests and stable ecosystems. Following the plants came the invertebrates. Arthropods, such as early insect-like creatures, millipedes and arachnids, had already made the journey ashore. For a vertebrate, this represented an enormous, untapped source of food, with virtually no competition. The land offered a buffet, and more importantly, a sanctuary. The combination of these two factors, the push from aquatic predators and the pull of terrestrial resources, created an intense selective pressure. A fish that could haul itself onto a muddy bank, even for a few minutes, could escape the jaws of a pursuing hunter. A fish that could venture into the damp vegetation at the water's edge could find a meal no other fish could reach. Each small foray onto land was a victory, a reinforcement of the behaviors and physical traits that made it possible. The sturdy, bone-supported fins were no longer just for navigating weeds. They were becoming instruments of survival, tools for straddling two worlds. The motivation was now clear: to escape the dangers of the old world and claim the prizes of the new. But evolution rarely proceeds at a steady pace. It often requires a catalyst, a global crisis that turns a promising opportunity into an urgent necessity. For any creature wholly dependent on water, there is no more terrifying prospect than its disappearance. In the late Devonian period, around 375 million years ago, the Earth's climate entered a phase of instability. Geological evidence points to a world of extremes, a time marked by periodic and severe droughts. These were not gentle, gradual changes, but harsh climatic shifts that could transform a thriving river system into a string of stagnant, isolated pools in a geologic blink of an eye. For the aquatic life trapped within, it was a catastrophe. As the water level dropped, the inhabitants were forced into ever-shrinking spaces. Overcrowding became rampant. The water, once rich with life-giving oxygen, grew warm, stagnant, and depleted. Decomposing organic matter choked the pools, and the water became a hostile trap rather than a sanctuary. In this desperate environment, a new set of survival skills became paramount. The ability to endure these harsh conditions, even temporarily, was the key to survival. This is where the unique adaptations of the lobe-finned fish provided a critical advantage. Many of these freshwater fish had already developed a primitive lung, an outgrowth of the gut that could absorb oxygen directly from the air. In the oxygen-starved pools, the ability to surface and gulp air was a lifeline, allowing them to outlast their gill-breathing competitors. But the truly revolutionary advantage came from their fins. When a pool dried up completely, the only hope was to reach another, deeper body of water. The strong, bone-supported fins, once used for navigating cluttered swamps, were now repurposed for a desperate overland trek. They became limbs, capable of propelling the body across mud and sand. It was not graceful walking, but a clumsy, determined shuffle from one puddle of life to the next. The droughts acted as a powerful evolutionary filter. Individuals who could breathe air and move between pools survived and passed on their genes. Those who could not perished. This relentless cycle, repeated over thousands of years, powerfully favored the development of stronger limbs and more efficient lungs. The crisis of the drying rivers was not just a challenge, it was the furnace in which the first terrestrial vertebrates were forged, transforming a water-bound fish into a creature that could endure the harshness of the land. For generations, the story of the transition from sea to land had a missing chapter. Paleontologists had fossils of advanced lobe-finned fish, like Eusthenopteron, and they had fossils of very early, fish-like amphibians, such as Acanthostega. But the creature that bridged this gap, the perfect intermediate, remained a ghost in the fossil record. Finding it became a holy grail of evolutionary biology. Paleontologist Neil Shubin and his team decided to hunt for this ghost with scientific precision. They knew the transition happened in the late Devonian, so they searched for sedimentary rocks of the right age, about 375 million years old. They also knew this creature would have lived in freshwater delta systems, so they looked for geological formations that represented ancient rivers. Their search led them to one of the most remote places on Earth, Ellesmere Island in the Canadian Arctic. After years of painstaking searching in the harsh frozen landscape, they found it. The fossil was given the name Tiktaalik roseae, a word suggested by local Inuit elders meaning large freshwater fish. Tiktaalik was everything scientists had hoped for, and more. It was a mosaic of fish and land-dweller features. It had gills, scales, and fins with delicate webbing, all unmistakably fish-like. But its skull was broad, flat, and crocodile-like, with its eyes perched on top, perfect for peering out from the shallows. Most remarkably, it had a feature no fish possessed: a mobile neck. It could turn its head without moving its entire body, a critical adaptation for scanning the riverbank for food or danger. But the most stunning revelation was inside its fins. These were not simple paddles. They contained a skeleton that was clearly a proto-limb, with a functional shoulder, elbow, and a primitive wrist. The bones were robust, the joints flexible and strong. This anatomy would have allowed Tiktaalik to do something revolutionary for a fish: a push-up. It could prop its body up, supporting its weight against gravity. While it was still an aquatic animal, it was perfectly equipped for life at the water's edge, capable of maneuvering in the shallows and making short excursions onto the mudflats. Tiktaalik was no longer a ghost. It was the beautiful, tangible evidence of a pivotal moment in evolution, a fish perfectly poised to push itself up and take the first momentous look at a world it was about to inherit. For a creature born of the water, the open air is a profoundly alien realm. It offers no buoyancy to counter the pull of gravity. It relentlessly draws moisture from the skin, and its atmosphere holds oxygen in a form that is completely inaccessible to gills. The delicate, feathery structures of a gill, so efficient at extracting dissolved oxygen from water, collapse into a useless, sticky mass in the air. To conquer the land, the descendants of Tiktaalik had to master a new way of breathing. They needed to reinvent their relationship with oxygen. The foundation for this revolution had already been laid. The simple air sacs, or swim bladders, used by many fish to control buoyancy, were connected to the gut. In the oxygen-starved Devonian swamps, our ancestors had learned to use these sacs as primitive lungs, rising to the surface to gulp air. This was a crucial first step, a part-time solution for a full-time problem. As these pioneers spent more and more time out of the water, natural selection began to favor improvements to this air-breathing system. The internal surface area of these sacs expanded, folding and branching to create more space for gas exchange, becoming more like true lungs. The circulatory system adapted in parallel, developing more efficient pathways to transport the oxygen-rich blood from the lungs to the rest of the body. But perhaps the most significant change was in the skeleton. Fish have relatively simple, delicate ribs, but in the fossils of the first true tetrapods, like Acanthostega and Ichthyostega, the ribs are transformed. They are thick, overlapping, and robust, forming a strong, protective basket around the vital organs. This reinforced rib cage served two critical purposes. First, it supported the body on land, preventing the weight of the animal from collapsing its own lungs. Second, and more importantly, it became a powerful engine for breathing. By using muscles to expand and contract this new, sturdy rib cage, these animals could actively pump large volumes of air in and out of their lungs. This was a monumental advance over the simple, inefficient gulping of their ancestors. With powerful limbs to carry them and efficient lungs to sustain them, the first amphibians had finally arrived. They were no longer just aquatic visitors, making brief, desperate forays onto the shore. They could now remain on land for extended periods, to hunt, to rest, and to explore. They had taken their first true breath as citizens of the terrestrial world, and with that single act, they set in motion a future that would lead to reptiles, birds, mammals, and eventually, ourselves. In the remote, windswept landscapes of eastern Greenland, paleontologists in the 1930s unearthed a fossil that would fundamentally change our understanding of life's greatest transition. Buried in 370-million-year-old rock from the late Devonian period, the remains belonged to a creature named Ichthyostega. It was not quite a fish and not quite a land animal, but a remarkable mosaic of both, a snapshot of evolution in action. Ichthyostega was a testament to the audacious first steps out of the water. It possessed a powerful fish-like tail complete with fin rays, a clear heritage from its aquatic ancestors. Evidence suggests it also retained functional gills, allowing it to breathe underwater. But its other features were revolutionary. It had 4 incredibly robust limbs, not flimsy fins. These were jointed, muscular appendages that could, for the first time, support a vertebrate's weight outside the buoyant embrace of water. Its ribcage was broad and overlapping, forming a strong barrel-like structure to protect its internal organs from being compressed. Perhaps most significantly, it had a distinct neck, allowing its head to move independently of its shoulders, a useless trait in water, but essential for surveying a new, terrestrial landscape. The most curious discovery, however, was in its feet. For years, scientists assumed the first tetrapods would have the standard 5 toes, but Ichthyostega shattered that assumption. Its fossilized hind limbs revealed not 5, but 7, and in some specimens, 8 toes, all arranged in a paddle-like structure. This wasn't the foot of a graceful walker. Instead, it suggests a creature that used its powerful limbs for a combination of functions, paddling through shallows, hauling itself through thick vegetation at the water's edge, and perhaps gripping muddy banks. It was likely a clumsy, lumbering pioneer on land, its belly dragging on the ground. It was less a permanent resident of the land and more of a heavily armed beachcomber, an explorer venturing into a new frontier. While its contemporary, Acanthostega, seemed more adapted to a fully aquatic life, Ichthyostega was the more terrestrial of the two, the one pushing the physical boundaries. It had the limbs, the lungs, and the ambition. But possessing the equipment for land was only the first step. To truly conquer this new world, it and its descendants had to overcome an invisible, relentless force that was irrelevant in their old home: the crushing power of gravity. For a creature born in water, gravity is a gentle suggestion. Buoyancy does all the work, supporting the body from all sides. But on land, gravity is an absolute tyrant. For the first amphibians, every movement was a battle against this constant downward pull. Their entire anatomy had to be re-engineered. The process began with the backbone. In fish, the spine is a flexible rod, an anchor for the muscles that produce side-to-side swimming motions. On land, it needed to become a load-bearing bridge, a sturdy girder supporting the weight of the body between the 4 limbs. The individual vertebrae developed complex, interlocking projections called zygapophyses, which prevented the spine from sagging and twisting under its own weight. Next came the problem of transferring that weight to the ground. The fins of their ancestors were only loosely connected to the internal skeleton. To walk, the limbs needed to be directly integrated into this new support structure. This led to the evolution of 2 critical innovations: the pectoral girdle, or shoulder, and the pelvic girdle, or hip. The pelvic girdle became a robust, multi-bone structure that fused directly to the vertebral column, creating a powerful, weight-bearing connection between the spine and the hind limbs. The pectoral girdle remained separate from the skull, giving rise to the neck, but became a strong, muscular sling that cradled the front of the body. The rib cage, once a delicate structure in fish, became thick and strong in early amphibians like ichthyostega. It formed a protective cage that did more than shield the heart and lungs. It prevented the entire body cavity from collapsing under the force of gravity. Finally, the limbs themselves transformed. Simple fins evolved into complex structures with distinct joints, shoulders, elbows, and wrists in the front, hips, knees, and ankles in the back. These joints had to be strong enough to withstand immense compressive forces, yet flexible enough to allow for locomotion. This was not a simple upgrade. It was a complete architectural revolution, a reinvention of the vertebrate body plan. The first steps on land were not graceful leaps, but strenuous, belly-dragging shuffles. Yet with each generation, the bridge of the spine grew stronger, the connection to the limbs more secure. The physical framework was adapting to a world of weight and pressure. But a new skeleton was not enough. To truly thrive, these pioneers had to learn to perceive this new world, a place where the very nature of light and sound was alien. Imagine a life spent underwater, where sound is a physical vibration felt through the body, and sight is a muted, blurry affair. Now, imagine breaking the surface. The air is sharp, sounds are crisp and directional, and light is blindingly clear. For the first amphibians, emerging onto land was a sensory shock. Their entire perceptual system, finely tuned for water, had to be rebuilt for life in the air. Hearing underwent one of the most ingenious transformations in evolutionary history. Fish feel sound vibrations through their skulls and a specialized organ called the lateral line. But air is far less dense than water and doesn't transmit vibrations well. A new system was needed. The solution came from repurposing an existing part. A bone called the hyomandibula, which once propped up the jaw, became detached and smaller. It became the stapes, a tiny piston-like bone. This bone connected a new membrane, the eardrum or tympanum, stretched across an opening in the skull, to the inner ear. Vibrations in the air would now cause the eardrum to vibrate, and the stapes would transmit these signals, amplified, to where the brain could interpret them as sound. It was the birth of the middle ear. Vision also required a major overhaul. Light behaves differently in air than in water. The cornea of the eye, which does little focusing underwater, suddenly became the primary lens in air. The eye's internal lens had to change shape to adjust for this. To protect the eyes from drying out and from dust and debris, two new features appeared: movable eyelids and tear ducts. For the first time, a vertebrate could blink and cleanse its eyes. The sense of smell became far more important. Water carries dissolved chemicals slowly, but air carries airborne molecules over vast distances. Nasal passages became more complex, lined with a greater surface area of sensory cells, allowing these creatures to detect food, mates, and danger from much farther away. At the same time, some senses were lost. The lateral line system, a network of sensors along the body that detected water pressure and currents, became completely useless out of the water. In all terrestrial vertebrates that followed, this ancient aquatic sense vanished. With bodies fortified against gravity and senses recalibrated for air, these pioneers were no longer just visitors to the land. They were becoming residents, equipped to perceive and interact with this strange new world. But they were not entering an empty realm. The land was already a thriving, alien kingdom of giant fungi, towering forests, and colossal insects, a world that would both challenge them and provide them with unimaginable opportunity. Some 359 million years ago, the Earth transformed. The Devonian period gave way to the Carboniferous, an age of astonishing growth and biological exuberance. The world became a vast, humid greenhouse. Continents clustered around the equator, creating immense tropical wetlands that stretched for thousands of miles. This was the kingdom the newly equipped amphibians inherited, and they would rise to become its undisputed rulers. The landscape was unlike anything on Earth today. There were no flowering plants or grasses. Instead, vast swamp forests were dominated by bizarre, towering flora. Giant club mosses called lepidodendron soared over 100 feet into the sky, their trunks covered in a diamond-patterned bark. Enormous horsetails, calamites, formed dense thickets like a primordial bamboo forest. This relentless plant growth had a profound effect on the atmosphere. Through photosynthesis, these forests pumped massive quantities of oxygen into the air, raising its concentration to as high as 35% compared to our 21% today. This oxygen-rich air supercharged life. It allowed arthropods, which breathe through simple tubes in their bodies, to grow to terrifying sizes. Dragonflies called meganeura, with the wingspans of modern hawks, patrolled the skies. Millipede-like creatures named arthropleura, more than 2 meters long and armored in segments, navigated the forest floor. Scorpions grew to the size of small dogs. In this world of giants, the amphibians thrived. They were the dominant vertebrates, the apex predators of the swamps. They diversified into a stunning array of forms. There were sleek, eel-like amphibians hunting in the murky water, small, agile salamander-like creatures scurrying through the undergrowth, and large, heavily built predators that staked out the water's edge. They were perfectly suited to this wet world. The endless swamps, rivers, and pools provided the ideal habitat for them to hunt fish, giant insects, and even each other. Yet, for all their success, they retained one unbreakable link to their past. They were still tied to the water for one critical purpose: reproduction. They had to lay their soft, gelatinous eggs in ponds and pools, safe from drying out in the air. From these eggs hatched aquatic larvae, tadpoles, that would breathe through gills before metamorphosing into their adult forms. This dual life, part in water and part on land, is the very definition of an amphibian. They were masters of the Carboniferous kingdom, but their reign was confined to the wetlands. For now, that was the entire world. And in this golden age, some of them would grow to a scale that would rival the monsters of any later era. Before the dinosaurs, before the great marine reptiles, the Earth belonged to the amphibians. The lush swamps of the late Carboniferous and subsequent Permian period were the crucible for an evolutionary arms race, producing vertebrate predators of a truly gigantic scale. These were not the modest frogs and salamanders of today. They were titans that ruled their world with formidable power. From the Permian period of Brazil comes Prionosuchus, the largest amphibian ever discovered. Reaching an estimated 9 meters in length, it was longer than a modern saltwater crocodile. With a long, slender snout filled with needle-sharp teeth, it was a perfectly designed ambush predator. Prionosuchus would have lurked just beneath the surface of rivers and lakes, its eyes and nostrils poking out, waiting to snatch large fish or any land animal foolish enough to come too close to the water's edge. It was the undisputed apex predator of its South American ecosystem. In North America, another giant held sway. Ariops was a different kind of beast. It was shorter, around 2 meters long, but immensely powerful and heavily built. Its skull was massive, broad, and flattened, with a huge mouth that could swallow large prey whole. With strong, stocky limbs, Ariops was more capable of moving on land than the crocodile-like Prionosuchus, likely operating as a top predator in and out of the water, a formidable presence on the muddy banks of Permian swamps. As time moved into the Triassic period, the legacy of giants continued with creatures like Mastodonsaurus. This amphibian was defined by its bizarre and enormous head. Its skull alone could be over a meter long, shaped like a massive triangle. Its most striking feature was a pair of large tusks that grew from its lower jaw. When its mouth was closed, These tusks passed up through specially formed openings in the roof of its snout, remaining visible even then. Mastodonsaurus was a huge aquatic predator, an intimidating hunter in the lakes and rivers of Triassic Europe. These giants, and many others like them, represented the zenith of amphibian evolution. They were the masters of their domain, the top of the food chain for millions of years. But the world that had allowed them to flourish was beginning to change. The single supercontinent of Pangaea was forming, creating vast, dry interiors. The global climate was becoming more arid, and the boundless swamps of the Carboniferous began to shrink. For creatures completely dependent on water for reproduction, this was a catastrophe. Their kingdom was evaporating, and as their world dwindled, a new type of animal was poised to take over. They were small, but they carried with them a biological invention that would free them from the water forever. A self-contained private pond for their young, the amniotic egg. The age of reptiles was dawning. By the heart of the Carboniferous period, the amphibians had become masters of their domain. Vast, humid swamps teeming with life were their kingdom. Creatures like the formidable Archaeops, a heavily built predator over 6 feet long, moved with confidence between the water's edge and the forest floor. With powerful limbs, strong jaws, and keen senses, they were the undisputed rulers of the swampy lowlands. They had achieved what their fish ancestors could only dream of, a life spent breathing air, moving under their own power across the solid ground. From a distance, they appeared to have completed the conquest of the land. But this victory was conditional. Their triumph was bound by an ancient pact, an unbreakable link to the world they had left behind. For all their terrestrial adaptations, they carried the ocean within them, and they were forever tied to the water. Their very skin was a constant reminder of their aquatic origins. Unlike the sealed, scaly armor of the creatures that would succeed them, amphibian skin was permeable and moist. It had to be. It served as a secondary lung, allowing them to absorb oxygen directly from the air or water, a process known as cutaneous respiration. This biological marvel, however, came at a great cost. It made them incredibly vulnerable to dehydration. A long journey away from a water source, an extended period in the dry air, could be a critical challenge. Their world was therefore not the entire landmass, but a green, wet fringe bordering the rivers, lakes, and marshes. They were pioneers with a leash, tethered to the life-giving pools that defined their existence. Nowhere was this dependence more profound than in the act of creation. The great amphibian advance onto land did not include their young. They still practiced external fertilization, releasing their eggs and sperm into the water in a ritual as old as their fish-like ancestors. The eggs themselves were simple, gelatinous spheres, lacking any protective shell to shield them from the dry air. They were, in essence, tiny, individual ponds that had to be laid within a larger body of water to survive. From these eggs hatched not miniature adults, but gilled, fully aquatic larvae, tadpoles. These young amphibians would spend their entire early lives as water dwellers, reliving the evolutionary journey of their species. Only after a period of metamorphosis, a radical transformation of their bodies, could they emerge onto the land as air-breathing adults. This dual life, the very definition of the word amphibian, was both their greatest strength and their most significant limitation. While they reigned supreme in the wetlands, the vast, dry interiors of the supercontinent Pangaea remained a forbidden frontier. As the global climate began a slow, inexorable shift towards drier conditions, this unbreakable tie to water was evolving from a simple fact of life into a potential weakness. A new kind of animal, one that had found a way to sever that tie forever, was about to step out of the shadows. The great challenge for life on land was not simply how to breathe air or how to walk on solid ground. The amphibians had solved those problems. The ultimate puzzle was how to break free from the water entirely, especially for the vulnerable act of reproduction. The solution, when it arrived, was not a stronger limb or a sharper tooth. It was an evolutionary masterpiece of biological engineering, the amniotic egg. This was more than just an egg with a shell. It was a self-contained world, a private nursery that allowed its occupant to develop completely on land. Inside a tough, leathery shell that prevented water loss, the embryo floated in its own personal pond, the amniotic sac. A yolk provided all the necessary food, and a special membrane handled waste. For the first time, a vertebrate could lay its eggs far from the water's edge, confident that its offspring would be safe and sustained. This revolutionary invention gave rise to a new group of animals, the amniotes. The earliest of these, which we now recognize as the first true reptiles, were unassuming creatures. A prime example is Hylonomus, a small, lizard-like animal discovered in fossilized tree stumps in Nova Scotia. It was no giant like Archaeopteryx. Measuring less than a foot long, it scurried through the undergrowth of the Carboniferous forests, hunting insects and other small invertebrates. In a direct confrontation, it would have stood no chance against the amphibian giants that patrolled the swamps. But Hylonomus and its kind possessed the ultimate advantage: freedom. They were not bound to the waterfront. They could push deeper into the forests, exploring drier terrain that was inaccessible to their amphibian contemporaries. While the amphibians were tied to a shrinking world of wetlands, these early reptiles were pioneers of a much larger one. For millions of years, the two groups coexisted, largely occupying different ecological niches. The large amphibians remained the dominant predators of the aquatic ecosystems, while the small, agile reptiles carved out a life among the trees and rocks. But the world itself was changing. The Carboniferous period, an age of warm, wet, swampy conditions, began to give way to the Permian. The climate of the supercontinent Pangaea grew more arid and seasonal, with pronounced wet and dry spells. The vast coal swamps began to shrink, replaced by drier plains and deserts. For the amphibians, every dry season was a trial, every receding pond a threat to the next generation. For the reptiles, it was an opportunity. Their waterproof skin and, most importantly, their amniotic eggs made them perfectly suited for this new, harsher world. A quiet revolution was taking place. Power was shifting not through a dramatic battle, but through adaptation to a changing planet. The age of amphibians was drawing to a close, and a new reptilian dynasty was poised to inherit the Earth. The Permian period was an age of titans, a world ruled by strange and powerful creatures. In the extensive river systems of the southern hemisphere, colossal amphibians like the 30-foot-long Prionosuchus reigned as apex aquatic predators, their crocodile-like forms perfectly adapted for ambush. On land, the dominant animals were not yet dinosaurs, but the synapsids, creatures more closely related to mammals, including the famous fin-backed Dimetrodon. The ecosystems were complex and seemingly stable, a vibrant culmination of nearly 100 million years of terrestrial evolution. Life had firmly established its hold on the continents. But the greatest threat to this world would not come from a new predator. It would come from deep within the planet itself. An environmental cataclysm of unimaginable scale was brewing, an event that would push life to the very brink of annihilation. Around 252 million years ago, a series of volcanic eruptions began in what is now Siberia. This was no ordinary volcanic event. It was a flood basalt eruption, the largest in Earth's history, which continued for hundreds of thousands of years. The Siberian traps spewed a colossal volume of lava, covering an area larger than Western Europe. More devastatingly, it released immense quantities of carbon dioxide, methane, and sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere. The consequences were catastrophic. The planet entered a period of runaway global warming, with temperatures soaring. The oceans became acidic and lost their oxygen, creating vast dead zones. On land, acid rain fell from the sky, stripping forests of their leaves and poisoning the soil and freshwater systems. This was the Permian-Triassic extinction event, known simply as the Great Dying. For the amphibians, it was an apocalypse. Their entire physiology, so perfectly tuned to the wet Carboniferous world, became a fatal flaw. Their permeable skin, which needed to stay moist for respiration, offered no protection against the toxic atmosphere and searing acid rain. The swamps, rivers, and lakes they depended upon for survival and reproduction either evaporated under the intense heat or became acidic and unlivable. Their gelatinous eggs and aquatic larvae stood no chance in these poisoned waters. The very foundation of their existence crumbled away. The extinction was not swift or merciful. It was a slow, grinding process of environmental collapse. Across the globe, an estimated 70% of all terrestrial vertebrate species vanished. The reign of the giant labyrinthodont amphibians, which had lasted for over 100 million years, was over. They were not defeated by the reptiles in a grand contest for supremacy, but were instead casualties of a planetary crisis they could not escape. The world fell into a profound silence, its vibrant ecosystems erased. In the aftermath, the few survivors faced an empty, broken planet, and the future of life on Earth would be determined by who could adapt and rise from the ashes. In the wake of the Great Dying, the world was a shadow of its former self. The once dominant labyrinthodont amphibians were gone, their dynasty erased from the Earth. But life is resilient. From among the survivors, a new chapter in the amphibian story began to unfold. The future of the lineage would not belong to giants, but to smaller, more specialized forms that had weathered the planetary storm. These creatures were the ancestors of the Lysamphibia, the group that contains every frog, salamander, and caecilian alive today. They were pioneers of a new era, adapting to a world now being rapidly colonized by a spectacular diversity of reptiles. Their strategy for survival was not to compete with these new rulers, but to thrive in the margins, mastering niches that the giants overlooked. Over millions of years during the Triassic period, the Lysamphibian lineage split, giving rise to three distinct and highly successful body plans. The first group, the Anura, became the frogs and toads. They radically re-engineered the ancestral amphibian form for a new mode of locomotion: jumping. Their hind legs became long and muscular, their ankles elongated, and their spines shortened and fused into a rigid rod to absorb the shock of landing. Early proto-frogs like Triatobatrachus show this transition in progress, a curious mixture of salamander-like traits with the beginnings of a frog's powerful jumping chassis. This unique adaptation allowed them to evade predators and catch prey with explosive speed. The second group, the Caudata, retained a more traditional body plan. These are the salamanders and newts. With their long tails and 4 limbs, they resemble the earliest landwalkers. But their apparent simplicity is deceptive. They became masters of the forest floor and freshwater streams, specializing in secretive, often nocturnal lifestyles. Their quiet persistence allowed them to flourish in damp, shaded environments around the world, from mountain streams to woodland ponds. Early fossils like Cararis from the Jurassic of Kazakhstan show a body form remarkably similar to modern salamanders, a testament to the enduring success of their design. The third lineage, the Gymnophiona, embarked on the most radical path. Known as caecilians, these amphibians abandoned their limbs entirely, evolving a serpentine form to conquer a hidden realm, the soil. They became expert burrowers, spending almost their entire lives underground in tropical regions. With reduced eyes, strong skulls for digging, and sensory tentacles on their faces, They are a fascinating example of extreme specialization. Their elusive nature means their fossil record is sparse, making their evolutionary journey the most mysterious of the three groups. These three distinct strategies, the explosive leaper, the silent stalker, and the hidden burrower, allowed the amphibians to rise again, diversifying in the shadows of the dinosaurs and securing their legacy for millions of years to come. The journey of the amphibians is one of the grandest epics in the history of life. It is a story that begins with a fin tentatively touching a muddy shore and leads to a world filled with an astonishing diversity of forms. Today, over 8,000 species of frogs, salamanders, and caecilians inhabit every continent except Antarctica, from the highest mountain lakes to the deepest rainforests. They are the living legacy of those first brave pioneers, a vibrant, breathing link to a primeval past that stretches back more than 370 million years. Their continued presence on our planet is a testament to an almost unimaginable capacity for survival and adaptation. They have persisted through multiple mass extinctions, outlived the dinosaurs, and weathered dramatic shifts in the global climate. Modern amphibians play a critical role in the health of our planet's ecosystems. As voracious predators of insects and other invertebrates, they help control pest populations that can impact agriculture and human health. In turn, they are a vital food source for a huge range of birds, mammals, and reptiles, forming a crucial link in the food web. Perhaps most importantly, their unique physiology, especially their permeable skin, makes them exquisitely sensitive to changes in their environment. They absorb pollutants from the water and air, making them exceptional bioindicators. When amphibian populations begin to decline, it is often the first warning sign that an ecosystem is in trouble, like a canary in a coal mine for the entire planet. Yet, despite their incredible history of resilience, these ancient survivors are now facing their greatest challenge. In recent decades, scientists have observed an alarming and rapid decline in amphibian populations worldwide. This crisis is driven by a host of human-induced pressures. Widespread habitat destruction for agriculture and urbanization is erasing the forests and wetlands they need to survive. Pollution from pesticides and fertilizers runs into their vital waterways, causing developmental problems and compromising their immune systems. Global climate change is altering temperature and rainfall patterns, disrupting their breeding cycles and drying up their habitats. And a devastating infectious disease caused by the chytrid fungus has spread across the globe, impacting hundreds of species. This combination of threats has created a perfect storm, pushing many species towards the edge. The first vertebrates to walk on land are now the most threatened vertebrate group on Earth. Their epic story, one of bold exploration and incredible endurance, has reached a critical juncture. It falls to us, the current stewards of the planet, to decide how this chapter ends. The fate of these living pioneers rests in our hands.